Um, just to define rites of passage, it's the process that marks the transition from one phase of life to another. And we can see them in the lifespan as any turning point in our life when we go through key changes where our identity, behaviors, choices, and roles change. So at that change in that identity too, really confronting, groundless, scary. And it can also be something that we've called forth for a long time, and we're really looking to step into and have been waiting for our strength to be able to do that, or the power in that for ourselves. So some of these might include in the lifespan an adolescent becoming an adult, a family going through change, divorce, blended families, growth, a stage of life closing, navigating a crisis. Anytime there's who we were before or after a significant life event, or stepping into a new way of being. So I just want to name that the term rite of passage came from a cultural anthropologist who was a white European man, Arnold van Gennep, and he actually coined the term in 1909. And what he was doing was he was studying the ceremony and the initiation, rites of passage across cultures and across different landscapes and across time. And so while, we just acknowledge this is where rites of passage as a term comes from, it's like before 1909, it didn't even have, we don't even know what the language for that was, because it was such an embedded part of life. Like it couldn't be separated from life. And so, been here for as long as humans have been alive. And so what came out of this is looking at that there are actually 3 key structures or stages that is consistent across cultures and landscapes and time. And they can get called different names. We're just going with some real key core terms here. And part of this is that these are the bones of those stages that we can look to, and it provides a map for us to orient both where we are individually right now and also where we are as a collective. And as we know, once we can locate where we are, we can actually drop more fully into that state. And as soon as we can step into that, things also begin to open up. So all rites of passage have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the rite of passage is instrumental in how we accept growth, change, and challenge, and allow that to be support for us to be able to more consciously move through the change. So we just want to also acknowledge that rites of passage gets used very loosely today. We hear it kind of, it's a returning term, and there is that hunger in us to mark these stages. And so we do that in healthy or unhealthy ways, conscious or unconscious ways. And what we want to look at is actually how we can make it more conscious, healthy, and connected, so that it actually allows that initiation to bring forth and open up more for us, and a deeper ground. So I'm going to pass that to you, Katie.
Great, thanks.
Oh, yeah, really quickly, there was just one question that I thought might be helpful. Someone was asking if you could just give an example of each of those stages.
That's
yes.
Liz who's helping us out. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, we'll go through that now.
Great. So, yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about what does this all look like. And one thing that I was thinking about as you were sharing, Hoea, is no matter what the change is, there's stress involved. So obviously, if it's something that we didn't want and that feels life shattering, or the rug gets swept out from under us, it can be very stressful, or in some to whatever degree. But even things that are good can be stressful, because as we step into a new identity, a new stage of life, a new role in the world, it requires letting go of other things, relationships, other roles, etc. And so one of the things when we look at rites of passage, when we look at ceremony, when we look at transition, there is something really relieving for a lot of people to have the map to say, oh, I did just lose some things in this transition. What were those? Or, what I want to celebrate about what I'm letting go of. And then here I am in the unknown, and this is really hard. And we'll talk more about the second stage, the liminal, in a moment, but it's really hard to be in the liminal, which is what we're in as a collective right now, which is we're not who we were, we're not who we're going to become. And it can feel groundless. It can feel the metaphor of wandering in the desert. So all that to say, it can be really relieving to have a map for many people and to say, oh, okay, that is what I'm feeling. And oh, that is where I am. And what can I do to support myself in the transition? So the first stage, the beginning stage, has many names depending on who you're reading. One of them is severance, separating from the old. Van Gennep called it pre-liminal because it's before the liminal. I have heard someone call it death, that the first stage is the death of the old. And sometimes that is a choice. Again, sometimes it's not. And that could be so many endings, right? It could be ending a job, ending a relationship, ending a role in the world, growing, something natural, leaving childhood and becoming an adolescent, or even getting married, or, having a commitment ceremony. You're leaving your identity as a single person. Our current economic, structural, social experiences as we've known it, at least for now, we have stepped out of in support of safety and health and taking care of ourselves and each other. So it can be something that needs to happen again, or it could be something that you get pushed into, where you don't really feel like you have a choice. And with that, there can be a new awareness that it's like, okay, there's something that's changing. There's something I might need to discover, or even a sense of unsettled, like irritation or groundless confusion, etc. And often in this stage also, or after the severance has happened, there can be a lot of resistance. Like, I don't want this to happen. And grieving and bargaining that we didn't want what we let go, to leave that behind. And as we move through that stage, there's a point where we finally realize it isn't going to be what it is. And the truth is, in the big picture, then something else might be possible. But as we realize we can't go backwards, then we're in the next phase, in the threshold or the liminal phase, where we really get, okay, things are different. And at that point, we can also begin to grieve or begin to let go consciously. And so when we look at ceremonies, in each ceremony, in every ceremony, there is all of these three stages: a beginning, middle, and an end, a severance, an incorporation, and a threshold. But there are also ceremonies that specifically are in support of or in honoring of one of these stages. So severance ceremonies, right? So those are letting go ceremonies where you might burn something or bury something or honor something. And that could be, leaving a job where your colleagues all give gratitude for what you've done. That might be something. It might be in attempting to move on from a relationship where there has been heartache or grief. There might be writing a letter and burning it, or kind of burning objects that were a part of that relationship, or giving them back, which could be giving them back with love even. And so some ceremony of really acknowledging, yes, this is no longer the case. This is not who I am anymore. I'm stepping out of that aspect of my identity.
Okay, and so then once we move through that, we drop down, and you can see that the underneath of the line here is the extraordinary world. So at the top is the ordinary world, which is how things were, and wrestling with that and that change. As soon as we come down into the threshold or the liminal, we enter the extraordinary world. And part of that is that it is the place of the unknown. The unknown, the unseen, the unrealized, the waiting, the darkness. And really what it feels like when we first arrive is it's deeply uncomfortable, really unsettling. It can feel like the rug's just been pulled out from the things that we trusted, that we knew about ourselves or that we could count on, that could have even, those things that we kind of earned about ourselves or earned in terms of our own anchors, even those can be challenged or moved. And so, this is that very uncomfortable sort of testing ground. And often we see this a lot with the healers or the healer archetype who finds it even harder to be here if we have an ego that we should that we're okay with this sort of practice. It's like no one is immune from the humility of dropping down the threshold and how it feels to sort of to need to ask for support, whether that's to other people or to that spiritual ground that we're looking for when we fall in here. So this is that the unfamiliar and the unknown place of becoming, because we're not what we were, but we're also not yet what we're going to become. And often in the beginning of this liminal space, liminal comes from that term of like veiled, and we actually can't see. And what it is it's inviting us to look past that into to be willing to really look and see at what's there. And so often it brings up anything that needs to be healed, or that those existential pieces. It's a time of inner turmoil, navigating trust versus doubt. Sometimes it feels like doubt becomes our best friend. We have, a different, it really challenges our relationship with ourself, questioning self and deciphering those values, purpose, and meaning. So very much an internal experience. Anything that we counted on outside, we have to then find that within. So a significant catalytic time of growth with the possibility of emergence into something greater. One of the parts of this emptying too is that we see in ceremony, like the word sacred, the etymology of sacred actually comes from sacrifice. And, so the idea of also when we start a ceremony, we have to sort of give something up to receive the answer that we're really yearning for. And so you sort of see that in that the severance, or that letting go in a way, is that sacrifice of something dropping away. And here we are in that space of deep listening. As we move into surrender to the unknown, there is a turning point in the liminal space where we actually somehow become either it's that our resistance has nowhere else to go, even in that it can be really intense wrestling, but once that falls away, it's like just falling exhausted on the floor, where something else breaks through and comes in, and that's that revelation or that understanding or the new eyes. And actually it can lead to a comfortability in being in the unknown. But as we know, we cannot stay in this extraordinary world or this place. We have to come back from our ceremonies. We have to come back to the world. Anything that we're given is given from more than just ourselves. And so that's what eventually brings us to emerge back up into the third stage. And so we're going to actually talk in a little bit about the ceremonies that we can do for ourselves when we're in the threshold or the liminal. But for right now, we'll just continue around into the third stage and you can also see this as a big frame. If you look at beginning, middle, and end of the ceremony, this is that middle bit. And the third part is how do we close or capture that and bring it home.
Right. And so then the third stage, incorporation, which means bringing into the body. Corp is our body. And so how do we bring what we've learned, bring the transition, bring the new identity, bring the new gifts into our bodies, into living them into the world? Will you put that slide back that you had? going. It has a mind of its own. Oh, thank you very much. And so in this stage, we have gone through the liminal, and oftentimes, like Hoea was saying, it emerges in us through experience, through the hanging out in the unknown, through working whatever it is in ourselves, and where we identify the things, oh, I didn't know that I had this much capacity for strength or for kindness or for creativity. And so the gifts that we find from being in the unknown that emerge, we then bring them out into the world, into our new roles, into our relationships, into, we talk about the gifts are really for our community, and we are just living them. We're benefiting, but the people around us are really benefiting as well. In this place, we might take on a leadership role in some way, explicit or just naturally in our communities, as someone who has learned this lesson and can hold that space for others, one that is comfortable in the unknown, one that has some wisdom from being in that place. So it's stepping into the new place and living, really living from there. And so then what we want to talk about is, so really taking this model, the rite of passage model, and really moving it into conscious transition. So how do we, as we understand what change looks like, what our experiences as humans are kind of universally with different flavors, we look at, we're bringing in, how do we move through this with intention? And ceremony is one way that we move through this with intention.